and drinks and snacks in the back for you who haven't had breakfast yet. So please help yourselves before we get started.
This will be
Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Chris Stover. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer with Futura Age, and we're excited to have everyone here today. We've got a couple of advisors from Thrivent here to present some information on legacy estate planning. So as the presentation gets going, we've got 2 clipboards that Karen has right there. We'll be actually passing those around. I know you signed in up front, but this is some compliance stuff that they are asked to have you guys complete. It's just a signature. So if you'll sign that as they're going. Kellen here, they're from Thrivent Financial. They know Audrey with the foundation through the Rotary, and they've offered to come and give this presentation to you. So after the presentation, please let myself, Tyra, the sales team, or Audrey know what you thought, and we might actually make this kind of a recurring series. So just let us know your thoughts, and we'll see kind of what other opportunities there are moving forward. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kellen and Doug, and let them share some information with you.
All right. Hey, good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Doug Jonson. I'm a financial advisor with Thrivent. This is Kellen Kranc. How do you pronounce it? Kranc, I'm sorry. First of all, thank you for having us here. Really, really appreciate being here. A couple of questions just for my own. Raise your hand if you're familiar with Thrivent. Okay, so a lot of people that are already familiar with Thrivent. Raise your hand if you're a Thrivent member. Just for my own. Okay, great. Raise your hand if you live here in the Elysium. Okay, so most people. I'm just for my own understanding or curiosity, what, if you don't mind sharing, why are you here? What are some of the things about this workshop that was appealing to you that made you want to come here? I'm just curious. Why are you here? Is anyone willing?
I live alone in my house,
Uh-huh.
and it's too big for me to take care of. And I live far away from my children, and so I need to redo my life.
Okay, so you're literally thinking about passing on your things to your children, and okay, so that's the stage of life you're in. Anyone else?
I'm 86 and I'm learning things the hard way. I sold some property that I bought 50 years ago, and I have a steep increase in my income, and I didn't know that Social Security would be taken away from you if you get over a certain amount.
Okay.
26 years as a licensed psychologist for the schools. Half of what I started with 20 years ago when I retired has gone to medical fees for insurance. So things change after you write your will, and I'm not happy with a lot of things.
Okay, so yeah, I'll summarize what he just said. So Bruce, thanks for sharing. So what Bruce said was he sold some property, sold some of his assets. It increased his tax bracket, and then it negatively affected his Social Security and his Medicare. I'm really glad you said that. That's something that we're going to talk about a little bit. Anyone else?
I think we've spent a lot of our life saving for what is now we always thought we were saving for the future, and the future is now.
Yeah.
We got to know where it's going to go.
Yeah, raise your hand if that's you, where you've spent your whole life saving and now all of a sudden you have it and now you got to figure out, what do I do with it? Raise your hand if that's you. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming. So we're gonna address everything that you guys shared about today. I want to give a couple disclaimers at the beginning. First of all, we're not lawyers, we're not accountants, so there's things that we can and can't do in this session. The other thing is we love questions, and there's going to be time for questions at the end. What if most times when there's questions that are about specific scenarios in your life, we can't give educated answers without gathering more information, and it's really not appropriate to gather all that information in front of everybody during this time. And so if that's you, if you have specific questions, we would love to just schedule a follow-up time where we can walk through some of those things with you. Kellen, is there anything that you would add?
No, I just want to say thank you guys for coming out today. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we can answer some of those questions that you guys have. I can't emphasize enough what Doug just said. One-on-ones are often the best ways to get your questions answered in this setting, because ultimately we have to figure out more about you to be able to give you guys educational answers about your situation. So today we're just going to be talking about, from an educational perspective, estate legacy planning, some of the keywords in estate planning, wills, trusts, some of those things that you've probably have heard of, and then some of the unknowns when it comes to legacy planning. So we'll talk a little bit about those today, and then, like Doug said, if you have questions afterwards, we'll be standing right over there and happy to answer them for you. So thank you guys.
All right, go ahead. We don't have a clicker, so we're just going to say next slide every time. So go ahead and get next slide. Okay, when you think of assets, do you mind writing these down, Kellen? When you think of assets, what do you think of? Go ahead and just yell it out. It's not rude. Yell it out. What is that? Automobile. So car is your asset. What else? When you think of assets, what do you think of? Home. Absolutely. Properties. Investments and savings. Let's break that down. What kind of investments? What are some different kinds of investments? Stocks, bonds, some good ones and some bad ones. I've had both. What else? CDs, annuities, insurance. Any other assets? Yeah, so there's retirement accounts like 401ks, IRAs. Yeah, so assets, there's so many different kinds of assets. When I say asset during this time, asset is anything that you own. So anything you own is an asset. So some people say, I don't have any assets. Well, you own something. That's an asset. So if you own something, if you have an asset, one day at some point, those assets are going to be passed to someone else. And so the goal of today is to talk about those assets and how you can protect those assets and how you can also ways that you can pass those on one day. So that's the goal. There's a lot of different ways that you can pass those on. And there's ways that you can do it more tax efficiently as well. So that's something that we're going to talk about. Next slide. All right. So on your table, there's a piece of paper that looks just like that slide. And I just wanted you to just spend a minute or two. Here you go. Just spend a minute or two writing down what are some of your main assets. What are the assets in your life that are important to you? They could be more valuable. It could be just that they're important because of sentimental, but what are some of your main assets that you have? I want you to write those down. Need like give you guys another 30 seconds or so. All right. So the reason that I want you to do that is I want you guys to be thinking about some of the assets you have that is part of your estate. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is just ways that you can pass those assets on one day. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And so we're going to touch on some of those ways, but I want you to be thinking about it. Sometimes it's nice to have a practical application. So one of the ways that you can pass assets on, go ahead, next slide, is transfer on death accounts. So there's certain things that are passed down, that there's certain assets that you have where beneficiaries are automatically named, and that's called a transfer on death. So some of those are retirement accounts like a 401k, IRAs, life insurance, your brokerage accounts. Those are all things where you name the beneficiary when you make those accounts. And when you die, those things are automatically passed on to your beneficiaries. One of the things we're going to talk about is it's really, really, really important to make sure that your beneficiaries are updated. I had several accounts where we listed, my wife and I, we listed our 2 kids as our beneficiaries for everything. And then we had another kid and we didn't update it. Right? If something had happened to me, that would have been, he would have felt really wrong, right? So it's really important that as life changes, because life does change, things happen, your family dynamics change, things happen. It's really important that you need to update your beneficiaries. Is there anything you would add to this?
Next slide. So the grand question is, have you told the beneficiaries that they are your beneficiaries, right? Beneficiaries come in all quote unquote shapes and sizes, right? Oftentimes people associate beneficiaries as a spouse or a child, right? That's kind of the most common way. You know, when you think about passing down money, I say, hey, I'm going to pass it down to my kid one day. He's going to pass it down to his kid one day, so on and so forth, right? What we explore with clients is that oftentimes beneficiaries are a lot larger conversation than just that. Grandchildren oftentimes are included in that. Organizations, charities, churches, right? Beneficiaries go much larger than just a spouse or a child, right? And so we want to make sure when we're talking to clients, you know, how are we outlining our beneficiaries? Are we doing it in the way that we want to? Okay, yeah, we're gonna. I was just making sure. Yeah, there's a little bit of a. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, no worries. So yeah, so just briefly, think about this. Have you talked to your beneficiaries about the assets that you have and what they might be inheriting down the road? Oftentimes, it can be an uncomfortable conversation. There's no question about that. And also, you want to make sure you're doing it the right way, right? And so when we talk about beneficiaries, we want to make sure it's personal to each and every one of you, right? And make sure that you're passing down the money and your assets that you do own the way that you guys want to do it. I'll go next slide. So really the emphasis of today is making sure that those assets that we've saved up for, right? You brought up earlier, hey, we've saved up our money our entire lives, right? And now we have these accounts or assets that we own. What if we don't use them, right? Where do they go? How do they get passed down? And how are we doing it the right way, right? So what we'll kind of talk about is how do we do this efficiently? There's some keywords in legacy and estate planning that most of you probably already know. Wills, right? Most of you probably have had a discussion around writing up a will. Trusts, right? Some of you have probably heard of trusts. When I think of trust, I think of this big, dooming, confusing thing initially of what is a trust? What should be in a trust? Should I have a trust? Trust can be simplified to a few different definitions that make them a lot easier to understand. And we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. So we're going to talk about that. And then really the second way we talk to our clients specifically because we don't set up trust. We don't set up wills for clients. We're not estate attorneys. At the end of the day, we always encourage it, and we include that in financial planning, right? But we often refer out to make sure that that gets done. What we can help get done is make sure that the assets that you do get passed down, or that you are passing down to your beneficiaries, is done tax efficiently. So oftentimes, the misconception with estate planning is okay, I've got these assets, right? And whatever they are, I know one day my beneficiaries are going to inherit them. Whether they pay a bunch of taxes on them or not, it's something, right? They get their inheritance and they're happy. What we've discovered, and this comes with new laws that have been changing consistently that Congress puts into place. Good old Congress. Everyone loves Congress, right? Woo, right? Is passing down certain types of assets can actually hurt your beneficiary's financial plan more than helping them, right? And there's certain types of assets that we want to make sure that we educate people on, and letting them know that, hey, there's some assets that your beneficiaries are not going to want to inherit. And there's going to be some assets that are going to be a lot more favorable for them to inherit. And we include that in your plan today, and making sure that you're using the right amount, or the right sources of income today, to make sure that the assets that you are passing down to your beneficiaries is tax efficient for them. Next slide. So the most common word, I think, associated with estate and legacy planning is a will. Raise your hand if you've heard of a will before. Okay. Whew. Okay. Jump that hurdle. Most of you probably know the easy definition of a will, right? So you write up a will to make sure that your assets that you have in your estate is passed down the way that you want to do it, right? Your will goes to an estate attorney, often gets notarized, hopefully, right? That's a huge step in the process that sometimes gets overlooked, making sure your will gets notarized. And it's really just a legal document that separates where assets are going when you're no longer here, right? Because you're no longer here to tell someone where those assets are going. The will's got a written out way to do that, right? And so with wills, the misconception is that wills avoid probate. Wills are included in probate. And we'll talk a little bit about what probate is specifically. But wills oftentimes just help ease the process and making sure that the assets that you own are passed down the way that you want them to be passed down. Next slide. Don't have to raise your hand for confidentiality reasons, but just think in your head, do you have a will put in place? If you want to raise your hand, you can. If you don't, you don't. But ultimately, what we always recommend to clients is making sure that they have a will incorporated in their estate plan. There's no question about it. A will, whether your assets are, like Doug said, right? If your assets that you have left behind is a gold necklace, or it's 8 different real estate properties, whatever it is, right? You want to make sure you have something in writing that says, hey, this is, or each of these assets are going to be passed down when I'm no longer here, right? Next slide. So guardians, right? We talk a little bit about letting our beneficiaries know, right, about what they're going to inherit when you're no longer here, right? Because oftentimes what we see is people being caught by surprise in an inheritance, right? Good or bad, right? I'm sure each of you have probably heard of your horror stories of, some people getting left out of an inheritance they thought they were getting, right? And then some people being pleasantly surprised that they received more than what they thought, right? And so these are just making sure, we list a couple here, siblings, cousins, college roommates, godparents, right? These are people that you probably have in your corner today that should be incorporated in the conversation around your estate plan, and letting them know that, hey, if you're no longer here, they know how your estate plan is going to operate when you're not here to facilitate it, right? A will partners in with this, right? But like making sure that your beneficiaries know, where your assets are going if you're not here. Next slide. I talked briefly about probate. Probate is, anyone like the word probate? It's just a gross word, isn't it? Yeah, it's not a fun process, right? Probate is simply put the legal process that takes place after you're no longer here to make sure it goes through court and make sure that your assets are distributed the way that they are anticipated to do so, right? A will, like I said, helps out with probate, but ultimately, to avoid getting assets or to help get assets out of probate, is you incorporate a trust into your plan. Raise your hand if you've heard of a trust before. Okay. Yeah. So trust, right? Another common word in estate planning, like I said, it's oftentimes kind of a glooming cloud. Hey, what is a trust? How does it work? Should I have a trust? Right? Who knows? Right? You can go to the next slide, actually. So we talk a lot about revocable living trusts with our clients, right? A trust helps assets avoid probate when you're no longer here. And we often look at incorporating a revocable living trust. We often look at putting that into place for assets that are often very large. Real estate. Some of you may have heard, real estate is a common asset that goes into a revocable living trust. And a trust has a trustee associated with it, making sure that the trust executes the way that it was supposed to execute when you are no longer here, right? So real estate can get very clunky in an estate plan, as you may imagine, right? If you pass down real estate, we want to make sure your beneficiaries know where those or who gets pieces of the real estate, whether it's your home, whether it's a rental property, whether it's a giant 20-acre farm, right? Whatever it may be, right? We want to make sure that we protect that asset by incorporating a trust put in place to have a trustee execute that distribution when the time comes. Yeah.
So one of the reasons, the reason that we pass things on is because we love people, right? And so we want to bless those people that we love. With a trust, raise your hand if you've ever lost somebody close to you. I've had a lot of loss in the last 5 years. There's the practical element of estate planning, but there's also the emotional part. And when you've lost someone, you're grieving, and those emotions and the pain is very real. And when you're grieving, the last thing you want to do is go through probate and navigate this really complicated legal process, right? So one of the ways that we can bless our loved ones is by setting things up as clearly and simply as possible, so that that's one less thing they have to go through while they're grieving. And so that's something that's important to know about. One of the reasons we do trust. It's really an act of love for our loved ones.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. Yeah. So possible assets, I kind of already ran through this, right? But some specific real estate is often the most common one that we see. It's oftentimes your largest asset when you're no longer here, right? We often see real estate. If it's not sold before you pass away, it can be the largest asset that's passed down to beneficiaries. So like Doug said, right, having a trust set in place to make sure that that gets distributed smoothly is really important when we're talking about your legacy plan. Bank accounts and investments, right? You guys listed those as some large assets that are incorporated in your legacy plan. Oftentimes it can make sense to do that as well, to make sure that those are avoiding probate, that big scary word that none of us like, right? None of us like hearing court and probate when we're no longer here. So it just helps provide clarity around our assets. Next slide. Yeah, good question.
Is the revocable word meaning that you can change it as long as you're alive?
Correct.
And so you have to keep upping when you change your mind.
So
Time with your attorney to change the revocable trust.
Yep. Yeah, good question. So revocable living, I can't speak directly on attorneys and their processes with working with clients, but essentially a revocable living trust, you incorporate it when you're living. So assets can go in and out of a revocable living trust versus an irrevocable trust, which an irrevocable trust you put in place to say, hey, this is where this asset is going. It's going to stay there and be passed down to our beneficiaries when I'm no longer here. The real difference is for tax purposes, which I'll talk briefly about here in a minute. Some assets are taxed differently in an irrevocable trust versus a revocable trust. And that comes with new laws that have been put into place in the past couple of years. 2023, February of 2023 is a key date that we often talk to clients about when it comes to trusts. Irrevocable trusts used to be very favorable for passing down assets like real estate and like securities, like investments, right? Stocks. That has become less favorable since 2023. And so if you have assets in an irrevocable trust, we'd love to talk a little bit deeper around how those are taxed when we pass those down to beneficiaries, because laws have changed as of recent. And a lot of the ways that we help work with people is making sure that we're not putting the wrong assets in different types of trusts, like revocable versus irrevocable, right? And then letting our estate planning attorneys help facilitate that, right? You know, I use football analogies. I played college football back in the day. I say back in the day, I'm 23 years old, so I'm not, back in the 2 years ago, I played college football. And so I like to associate, and oddly enough, I played quarterback, so this makes it even better. I like to associate our job as quarterbacking your legacy and estate plan. We partner with estate attorneys, accountants, CPAs, right? And they're part of our team, right? And making sure that we refer you guys to the right estate planning attorneys and accountants to make sure that your estate plan is in great shape. But we help quarterback, you know, your legacy plan and making sure that you're passing down the right assets, right? Naming the beneficiaries that you want to be inheriting your assets, and then putting the right assets in different buckets to make sure that it's done tax efficiently. And so, you know, really, I'll kind of jump into kind of my next piece, which is really the second piece that we pass down assets efficiently, and that's through taxes. Again, this is just a total rhetorical question, but who likes taxes in here in this room? No, nobody likes taxes. Okay, let's just get that out. Everyone knows taxes are a burden, whether you're living and you're living on the dollars that you're receiving as income. But oftentimes people forget, hey, how are taxes included in the assets that I pass down to my beneficiaries? Whether it's my child, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a charity, a church, right? An organization, a grandchild, right? We've got all the things in place. We've got a will, we've got a trust. Have we incorporated taxes into the conversation? That's really kind of the missing piece that we end up finding out with people is, hey, you want to pass down this asset to your beneficiary. What are the tax implications for him or her to inherit that, right? I talk often about the Secure Act 2.0. I won't go too deep into it, right? Because I don't want to give you guys very specific information without learning more about each of your situations. The Secure Act 2.0 put a very unfavorable rule in place for passing down retirement accounts specifically. So I use this as an example. If you pass down, for example, a traditional IRA or a traditional 401k to your beneficiaries, oftentimes we think, hey, we'll use our retirement funds as long as we can. And then if there's some left over, those will go to the kids. If you pass down any dollars in your traditional IRA or 401k, your beneficiaries have to empty that traditional IRA or 401k over a span of 10 years. Meaning, if you have a traditional IRA, it goes to your beneficiaries. They have to take money out of that account over the span of 10 years. So they have to include it on their taxable income each year. And so what that means is, okay, let's say there's a 40-year difference between you and your child, right? You pass away at, call it 95, right? They're at 55. Now they have to take more income at probably their highest income earning years on an annual basis for 10 years And depending on the size of that retirement account, that could be a very large sum of money that they have to take as annual income and probably put them into a new tax bracket. And they don't want to do that. I can probably speak for most of your beneficiaries that they don't want more taxable income in their highest earning income years, because we already know what taxes do to you during those years. They hurt, right? Taxes hurt when you're in your highest earning income years. So we often like to make sure that we shape our legacy and estate plan, and making sure that we're choosing the right assets to give to our beneficiaries, whether it's a child, grandchild, or whatever it might be, and helping you live on the assets that you should be living on, and leaving on the assets that you should be leaving on, right? And then incorporating those tools like wills, trusts, into your plan to make sure it's done efficiently, right?
Ross needs to exempt to some of that tax problem, but 10 years.
Yep. So he asked a Roth is exempt from that. That is correct. A Roth IRA is tax free to you as income, or Roth 401k, either or. It's also tax free to inherit as a beneficiary, right? So if you have any questions about your specific retirement accounts and how those could be passed down, we're happy to talk about those after the presentation. So the last thing that we like to, I've talked about, the quarterbacking and assembling a team to make sure that your legacy and estate plan is done correctly. This is the team, right? This is kind of the hey, having a financial advisor incorporate, these into your plan to make sure it's done correctly, and help facilitate, okay, who should be working on what, right? I use football analogy again here. If we're the quarterback, we want to make sure that our receivers are running the right routes, our running backs are running the right way, right? And so incorporating a financial advisor, an estate attorney, often a tax professional like a CPA or an accountant, right? And then having a trustee or an executor in your plan, right? Making sure that they're aware that, hey, you're not to put all the pressure on them, right? Pressure on the shoulders here, but you're the one that's going to be executing my estate plan when I'm no longer here. They need to be aware of that at the end of the day. And so assembling a good team to make sure that everything's in ship shape. And ultimately it's not a fear of where your money's going to go and how it's going to be passed down, but it's more of a clear picture on how it's going to be done. Go next. Should be one more. Yeah. So there's our contact information, by the way. We do have cards too. We were happy to give to you guys. I know some of you had our information to make sure that you guys have a person to reach out to if you're not having this conversation. And if you already do have someone and you haven't had this conversation, I would encourage you to bring it up, right? Bring it up at the end of the day and make sure that, these topics are being talked about in your guys' financial plan, because it's often something that can go unnoticed in a financial plan.
You have contacts in Tacoma?
Say again.
You have contacts in Tacoma?
Contact.
Those are Federal Way.
Oh, yeah. So those are our offices in Federal Way. So Doug here lives in Tacoma. We did have a Tacoma office that, for certain reasons, is no longer here. The plan is to have one sooner than later. So we will hopefully have an office in Tacoma here soon. Again, that's the hope. But for now, our offices are in Federal Way, but we often meet with clients where they're at too. So if there's a reason that you guys do want to schedule a one-on-one meeting with one of us, we're happy to meet you guys where you're at and have a conversation around it. So, and then next slide, yeah. So these are the disclosures that we do have to present to you guys after the presentation. There's a lot of compliant things that we do have to follow as financial advisors. I won't read through all of it. I'll allow you guys 15 seconds to read through all of it. Ready, set, go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, I'm just kidding. So again, end of the day, right? We just like to provide education around these topics. At the very least, give you guys a small runway to get started. If you would like to have a conversation with one of us, we're more than happy to. If you have a professional that you'd like to talk to, these are topics that would be great to bring up to them. I want to leave it just kind of floor open. Any questions from what we talked about today? Yeah. Do you mind? Yeah, I'll bring you the microphone real quick.
Quarterbacks are usually the highest paid people on the team. What does it cost to talk to you?
Ask Tom Brady. No, I'm just kidding. We provide free consultation for the first couple of meetings that we're talking to you guys. We provide free consultation to do so. We're very transparent about our fees and the way that we work with people. Rightfully so. We believe that's very important in our industry. And so that will be a conversation that will be had in the midst of our conversation, but you guys won't get a surprise bill on your front door just for having a conversation with us. So, yeah. Oh, yep. I will.
Is the necessity of a trust something that you help us decide, or is that the attorney's job? I guess what I remember hearing from the last time we talked to an attorney, but this is, as you said, it's dated, but the trust was a lot more expensive to set up. And unless you owned property in different states, it probably wasn't necessary to put into a trust. I don't know if that's my stereotype of what I heard, or if that's some truth in that, or what comments do you have?
So great question. We don't provide specific legal advice around, because we don't set up trusts, like we said, right? So we can provide kind of our general guidance around, your larger assets that a trust could be incorporated into. Oftentimes we do leave it up to the attorneys to make that decision and help you facilitate, hey, what does it cost, to put a trust into place for your larger assets? Again, end of the day, right? We want to make sure I'm a magnet. It has to make sense for each of your financial plans, right? So everyone in this room has different financial situations going on. So we like to make sure we take inventory before we help you make a decision on that. But we do, end of the day, like to leave it up to estate attorneys to help you decide whether an asset should be in a trust or not. So hopefully that answers.
It depends on what you want to accomplish too. And an estate attorney is going to walk through that with you.
Yeah. They're
going to help you decide what's your primary goal, and then they'll help you decide. A will is sufficient or a trust is good.
You had another question over here.
The first few meetings with you are no charge. After that, what is the charge to meet with you?
Great question. It varies, right? So our fee, we get paid in a few different ways. We charge a financial planning fee. Oftentimes with clients, it starts at around $2,000 annually and goes up to $10,000. It's based off of complexity. So I can't tell you exactly, what your fee would be. But again, right, we would make sure that that's very transparent before moving forward. To make sure you're not surprised with any fees being associated with it. We also provide an investment advisory fee for investments, right? If investments are incorporated in the planning work that we're doing, oftentimes that can be a fee that substitutes the financial planning fee, right? And so just know, end of the day, right? We aren't over the top. We try not to be over the top with our fees. We want to make sure it's the fee that's right for your plan, right? Because the fee that we charge is associated with exactly how we're working for you. But that can be the range of fees that are paid around $2,000 to $10,000 a year. But again, We often like to provide, a couple free consultations, a couple free recommendations before we become your financial advisors or quarterback in this situation. So.
About the trust, when someone dies, does it have the trust, does it have to be immediately used, or can it go years and siphon those funds out of there into the recipients?
So say that again. Sorry.
Oh, okay. A trust.
Yeah.
You put your, let's say, stocks into a trust.
Okay.
And those be divided a bit among the beneficiaries. Does that have those beneficiaries? Do they have to receive that and within a time period after you pass away, or can it go on for years coming out of that trust? Can that trust be active for years after you're dead?
It can, right? It can be structured to where the assets that are inside the trust are not paid to the beneficiary until a specific amount of time, right? There's, oftentimes, you may have heard of a trust fund baby out there, right? Who inherit a trust, right? And aren't able to use it until they are above the age of 18, right? That's just an example that we hear often, right? So they can be structured in ways to where your beneficiaries that are inheriting it are not actually inheriting the assets until down the road. Now, again, I would say consult with a estate attorney, which we can help set that up to make sure that that's formulated correctly, right? But it can be formulated that way.
Is that a good end around for the iris then?
Say again.
Is that a good end around for the iris? So you said the IRA had to be taken out in 10 years.
Yeah.
If they're in a trust.
Same rules apply. Yeah, same rules apply. Yeah, it's the new law that was put into place as of recent, the Secure Act 2.0.
No matter where they are.
Yeah, unfortunately, they fall under the same rules where there's a 10-year window now. There's the stretch IRA. Now it's essentially, right, we have to plan of, hey, if there is assets left over in a 10-year window, we often incorporate the beneficiaries into the conversation to make sure that they know that this is going to take place and how should we structure it, right? We like to call it soundboard planning, where we work with, clients that are talking about estate planning and legacy planning, and then making sure that we're having conversations with their beneficiaries so they're aware of potential tax implications of what they might inherit and how it could affect their plan. So. Yeah. No speaker under here, right?
These are more specific questions that maybe that the attorney will ask, but when somebody is getting something over 10-year span, who pays for the administrative costs for all of those 10 years where it comes out of a fund, and is that figured into whatever they're receiving and then they're billed for what it's been managed for those 10 years? Do you understand what I'm saying?
If it's in a trust, the trustee helps execute that. Thrivent does have a trust company where we, Thrivent acts as the trustee for estate plans. There is a trustee that helps execute that. IRAs specifically, right? If you inherit an IRA, lo and behold, it's called an inherited IRA. If you get an inherited IRA, the facilitation of helping those funds exit the inherited IRA are often in the advisor's court, the financial advisor's court. Oftentimes that's associated with a management fee for managing the funds inside of it. But usually there's no extra cost to help get the funds distributed from just an IRA that you may inherit, right?
Where do long-term care policies figure into all of this?
So explain further your question.
Well, people have a long-term care policy that pays for their medical care. Is that in any way taxed or considered an asset, or it can't be passed down usually, but
Yeah, great question. Long-term care is something that we talk closely with clients with really on a day-to-day basis. It's something that should be incorporated in everyone's financial plan. Long-term care often supplements the cost of long-term care, right? So we put long-term care into place to protect our legacy and making sure that our assets are not going from this bucket of assets that we have, and now we've spent all of it on potential long-term care costs that can be very large nowadays. I'm sure most of you have heard of some of the horror stories of the very large costs of long-term care. We incorporate that to make sure that you're planning for that, right? Rather than hoping that it never happens. But when we plan for it, right, we want to make sure that we're helping the cost of that to make sure we're protecting our estate, meaning we're protecting the assets that we own and that we want to pass down to our beneficiaries by incorporating something like, a long-term care policy in place to help pay for that. Yeah.
This doesn't exactly answer your question, but it depends. This isn't what you want to hear, but it depends on the policy too. So some policies are life insurance policies in nature with a rider for long-term care, and that gets passed on to your beneficiary because it has a death benefit. There's some policies, like my wife has a long-term care insurance policy through Thrivent, and there's a rider on that states that anything that's not used for long-term care gets passed on to our beneficiaries. So there's some long-term policies that get passed on to beneficiaries, and then there's some that don't. It really just depends on what your plan is for long-term care, and each policy is different. So that's one of the things when a client will ask us a question, we'll say, well, we need to see your policy. And it's not because we're nosy, it's because we need to see it because every policy is different.
Yeah.
So say you're handing down investments,
Mhm.
and say my dad worked for Boeing a long time ago, and now I'm getting his Boeing shares, which have gone up in value considerably over that amount of time. What's the capital gains tax when I inherit? Am I responsible for capital gains tax on when he bought the shares? Is it capital gains from when I inherited the shares to now to when I sell them?
Yeah.
Is there a recommended way of handling that?
Great question. Number one, it depends on the type of account. Oh yeah. So he said hypothetically, if he inherits Boeing shares from his father, and they have grown a large sum since the time. So we use the word cost basis, which can be kind of a confusing word, but really the cost basis is what the shares were purchased at, and what they are valued at now is what they're valued at now is the market value. What the shares were purchased at is the cost basis. So he's saying that the shares that he would be inheriting have grown significantly, and the difference between the cost basis and the value of them are large, right? So if those were sold while your father was alive, right, he would have to pay capital gains tax, right? That's how capital gains tax works. Now, depending on a couple of things, the type of account it's in, right? Sometimes they're in retirement accounts, sometimes they're outside of retirement accounts. If they're outside of retirement accounts, it depends on if they're listed in specific types of trusts, revocable or irrevocable. If they're outside of a trust, oftentimes you get what's called the step up in cost basis. So essentially what that means, I'll try to explain it with my hands here. So let's say Jeremy's got it down back there. Let's say the cost basis, right? So when his father received the shares, they were worth $15 a share. Now let's say they're worth $100 a share. So now there's this difference of $15 to $100 of gains in there. Well, the step up in cost basis means that your cost basis when you inherit them, as long as he didn't sell them beforehand, is now what they were at the time of death, right? So if the market value at the time of death was $100 and now you own all those shares and they're worth $100, you can sell those at the step up in cost basis. Now, what they incorporated in February of 2023 is sometimes they've we've had people put those type of assets into irrevocable trusts, which those no longer get that step up in cost basis because they're in an irrevocable trust. Because irrevocable trusts have many benefits in doing so. So Congress said, hey, let's take something off of those benefits. Good old Congress, right? So when you inherit securities in an irrevocable trust, you no longer get that step up in cost basis. And that's where the real planning comes in. And we have to make sure that when you inherit those shares, they're not in an irrevocable trust because you won't get that step up in cost basis. So I know that was a little bit of a rabbit hole, but no, that was a great question. That's a very common thing that we talk about with clients, that step up in cost basis. Yeah.
I assume there's people that die and have never done anything.
Yeah.
What happens to them?
So if they haven't yeah, sorry.
Well, if a person dies and he doesn't have anything in writing anywhere or hasn't spoken to anybody except his kids and told them that just when you get it, just share it in half. What happens to that?
So there's different assets that are passed down differently. So Doug talks briefly about transfer on death accounts. So like if you have a life insurance policy, those have a beneficiary on the life insurance policy that will go directly to the beneficiaries of that life insurance policy. Your other assets, I'll take real estate as an example, right? If you don't have a will put in place, right, those will, and even if you do have a will in place and you don't have a trust put in place or anything like that, they go through probate, right? And then after they go through probate, they go into your estate. And so the court essentially has to decide, right, how those are distributed to your beneficiaries. And so what we do is we want to not leave that up to question. We want to make sure that there's a efficient plan that is put in place for those assets that don't have that transfer on death agreement to it, right? It's like the life insurance policy.
Isn't part of the answer to his question the fact that it depends on state laws?
Yes, it does. It definitely affects it. What's the word I'm thinking of? Depends on state laws. Definitely. We can't give you, that's more of an estate attorney's answer to your question because they know the ins and outs of how probate works, how assets are passed down to beneficiaries. We just help make sure that that conversation has been had before a death happens.
I guess formerly known as Prince. Yeah, not personally, but okay. So, does anybody know his kind of passing estate story? I'll give you the quick version for those who don't. Yeah, he had no will. He had nothing in place. He had, I think the estimate was 156 million in assets. It took over 6 years for his three step siblings to get whatever they received from that settlement. And there was a portion of it that was taken through the court and probate and costs and fees. So that 156 million that he intended to send down to his family, again, it took 6.5 years for them to struggle with the court system to get that. So when you talk about the value of having a plan in place, right? You think about, you're talking about the emotion of grieving. Who wants to grieve and talk to a lawyer and go to court and continue to fight battles, right? Like I can name 3 people in my family right now who are still struggling because they didn't just have a conversation. I'll actually tell my grandfather's life insurance story. So my grandfather passed in, I think, 2019. And for years, he told me, Jeremy, I've got a life insurance policy. I'm good. Don't worry about it. What we found out is that he had a $10,000 burial policy through the Louisiana School District. And, his funeral all in was about $23,000. So we as a family were out 13. But that's the simple thing that happens when you don't have a conversation, when you think you've got it on your own. Again, I always say, really quick show of hands, who does their own dental work? Just me? Okay. All right. Who does their own checkups at the doctor, right? We all go, we see a doctor, we see a counselor, we see a pastor or a priest. We have someone that's walking along our life journeys. I want to encourage you not to walk your financial journey alone. We're here to help.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah.
That goes for wills too. do your own will.
Hi, good morning. Quick question. So, I think I heard you earlier. Even if you have a will in place, at the time of death, the the home would still go into probate if it doesn't have a trust. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes. Yeah. Oftentimes it goes through probate, but the difference there is probate becomes a lot easier with a will put in place. You talk about the Prince story, right? When you're trying to figure out where things should be passed down because there's nothing in writing, nothing notarized, nothing signed by an estate lawyer saying where it should be passed down, things get confusing. So a will just helps facilitate that process.
Sorry, I'm in the mood to share stories. I'll share one more really quickly. There's a client. She was 36. This would have been last summer. She passed away. Again, just the importance of having conversations. She was married, got divorced, and got remarried. No one ever had the conversation with her about changing her beneficiaries. So upon her passing, all of her assets went to her ex-husband, and there's nothing that her current husband can do about it. Again, it's the simple thing of, hey, let's have a conversation with someone. Have I changed my beneficiaries? Have I updated the will? It's just like we all go to the doctor for a yearly or annual checkup. You should also have a financial checkup, right? Once a year, it's, hey, I got to change the name of my beneficiaries. I had another son. I had another grandkid. There's someone else in the family. We want all of our money to go to our dogs now because we hate our kids. Whatever it is, have that conversation.
The idea of probate, you see a lot of advertisements all the time about how to avoid probate. What does that mean? Does that mean that they're just trying to get you to work with them, or you just said that everybody has to go through probate?
Yeah, so trusts avoid probate. So oftentimes that's how we incorporate. We try to avoid probate is by incorporating trusts into a plan, right? So that's what estate attorneys will help analyze. Is gosh, that is annoying. Oftentimes if your largest asset goes into probate, right, there can be a lot of issues with that. That's why we often incorporate putting a trust in place to make sure that asset does not have to go through probate. Yeah.
What really is probate? Is it like the court has to look at it? Is that what it means?
It goes through court. Yep. So your assets, after you pass away, they go through court. Were you going to say something, Doug? Okay. Yeah. So probate is the process of, after you pass away, the court helps decide how assets are divvied respectively to how your will is written out, essentially. And so the way that gets avoided, right, is to make sure that assets are put into a trust where a trustee can help facilitate that process otherwise, especially for larger assets. Yeah.
I believe the word you were looking for earlier was intestate, which was the answer to this gentleman's question. If you don't have a will, the state has one for you, and that is probate court.
Mm-hmm.
Intestate.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know how to use this. Okay, my question is, I do all of this stuff and I die and there's a disaster and everything is gone, the house, all my paperwork. Is there a national database that holds this information? Who knows that I even had it? If the people I talk to are people that are close to me, which is in this town, but what if there's a disaster like, Louisiana, all those places, and everything disappears paperwork wise? Is there a national database that holds the information so that somebody can know that I had something that might be worth some money in the cloud somewhere?
That's a great question.
Your attorney is required to keep a copy of your will or trust that they make for you in perpetuity.
And
He disappeared too.
And give a copy to somebody who lives outside of your home, so that if your home is destroyed, there's a copy of your will or trust with someone else.
Where does it go? Who has it? My whole family lives in Pierce County, so.
Give it to me.
I was gonna say, yeah,
Or your Thrivent agent.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's a difficult question. Yeah, you're saying essentially if everything gets wiped out, right? And I mean, we are seeing that, right, down in Florida, right? Um, I would assume that there would be record of that. If everyone's 401k got wiped out I just don't see that being the possible. Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's attached to your social security number. So these assets, right? So like your 401k, IRAs, any assets, they're attached to your social security number, which is why we want to keep social security numbers as close to us as possible because they're so important for things like that, right? Situations where, if you and many of your loved ones are no longer here, including maybe the executor of your estate, right? Your assets are attached to your social security number to where that can help facilitate the process. You bring up a great point, right? And kind of what we showed up here too is expanding that bubble and making sure that, the people that could be included in your estate know about your estate, right? Not even if they, know the value necessarily, but just know that, hey, they are going to be included in your estate in some way or form. And so just being vocal about it at the end of the day, I think is appropriate. Yeah. And making sure that your team also is aware, financial advisor and your attorney, so on. Yeah. I think we're gonna close up questions, and we're gonna go kind of to we're gonna close up, right? And I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that your questions are answered. So Doug and I will be here for a while after this conversation. You're more than happy to come up to each of us and have a conversation with us around some more questions that you might have. We'll be here. Doug, anything else that you?
Yeah.
I think the biggest takeaways are, first of all, it's important to have a will or a trust. And it's important to talk to an attorney to decide which one of those is best. I think it's important to make sure your will and trust is updated and make sure your beneficiaries are updated. And then the other thing is it's important to have a talk with a financial advisor because they're going to be able to help you to know the most efficient tax efficient way to pass on those assets. So I think those are the big takeaways. We're happy to answer any more questions, and appreciate all the questions. These were really great. Thanks for coming.